Please take your seats. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. General Martin, Mrs. Martin, Mr. Swisher, Emily. We'd like to welcome you all to AFRI's Health Day. I'm Dr. Tom Williams, Director of the Army Physical Fitness Research Institute, and with each resident class, as AFRI brings together, the Army Physical Fitness Research Institute brings together renowned speakers to try to motivate you to take advantage of the coming year, to help you focus on those things that perhaps you've put aside as you've faced the multiple challenges that senior leaders have to face. We'd like to express our sincere appreciation to the Daniel and Joanna Rose Fund and the Claude Moore Foundation for making today's program possible via the very generous support they provide to the Army War College Foundation. Now, we hope today's presentation is going to motivate you to that better understanding of the complex interplay between leadership, health, and fitness. We also hope that you'll become motivated by the important, inspiring information that our two distinguished speakers are going to provide. And we sincerely hope that you'll take advantage of the coming year and give yourself permission to focus on your own health and fitness, not only for yourself, but for those in your family and for those that you'll lead once you leave here. Please note that there is built-in time at the end of each presentation for questions. Now, it gives me great honor to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Dean Ornish, with his presentation on the power of personalized lifestyle changes, a topic of strategic importance in a year focused on professional development. Dr. Ornish is the founder and president of the nonprofit Preventive Medicine Research Institute in Sausalito, California, and his pioneering work was the first to prove that lifestyle changes may stop or even reverse progression of heart disease and early-stage prostate cancer, and even change gene expression, turning on disease-preventing genes and turning off genes that promote cancer, heart disease, and premature aging. Recently, Medicare agreed to provide coverage for his program, the first time that Medicare has covered an integrative medicine program. He was recognized by Life magazine as one of the 50 most influential members of his generation and by Forbes magazine as one of the 7 most powerful teachers in the world. In this lecture, he's going to describe for us what enables people to make sustainable lifestyle changes. He's the author of 5 best-selling books, including New York Times bestsellers Dean Ornish's Program for Reversing Heart Disease, Eat More, Weigh Less, Love and Survival, and The Spectrum. Dr. Ornish provides strategic leadership and insights on health and fitness as a member of several international boards of directors. Please join me in giving a very warm Army War College welcome to Dr. Dean Ornish.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. I want to thank Dr. Williams and Vera and General Martin and Mrs. Martin and Congressman Plotz for the opportunity to be here today and to the foundation. Most of all, to thank you for the chance to be of service here, which is why I came. I want to talk about the power of lifestyle changes. You know, we tend to think of advances in medicine as being a new drug, a new laser, something really high-tech and expensive, and we often have a hard time believing that the simple choices that we make in our lives each day, like what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, whether or not we smoke, and perhaps most important, how much psychosocial support, how much love and intimacy we have in our lives. If these simple changes can make such a powerful difference in our lives, what they do. And in our research, we've used very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art measures to prove how powerful these very simple and low-tech and low-cost interventions can be. But if you had to just put in one word, what is the real theme of our work? It's to really address the underlying cause. And I've been showing this cartoon for many years, but it's as true now as it was when I first started doing this work 35 years ago, that if we don't treat the underlying cause of a problem, any problem, then let's say heart disease. I got interested in doing this work many years ago when I was learning how to do bypass surgery with Michael DeBakey, the heart surgeon. We'd cut people open, we'd bypass their blocked arteries, he'd tell them they were cured, they'd go home and they would do the same things that had caused the problem in the first place. They'd keep smoking, they'd eat junk food, they would be under stress and not manage it well, they wouldn't exercise. And so more often than not, the bypasses would clog up, we'd cut them open again and have to bypass the bypass, sometimes multiple times. And so for me, that became a metaphor of an incomplete approach, like mopping up the floor around the sink that's overflowing without also turning off the faucet. And part of what we learned is that when we can treat the cause, that your body has a remarkable capacity to begin healing itself, and much more quickly than we had once realized, if we simply stop doing what's causing the problem in the first place. And it's a guiding principle that if we don't treat the cause, then the same problem tends to come back again, or you get a new set of problems or side effects, or even on a health policy level, you may have painful choices. And so if we can treat the underlying cause, it's a really, in a sense, it's a radical approach. Radical in the sense meaning the root. Like, remember what a square root sign used to be called a radical. It's radical in the sense if we can deal with the root of the problem, the cause of the problem, then we have much more degrees of freedom in how we can go about solving it. And we all know that lifestyle can help prevent disease, but we've actually been able to show that it can treat disease in some ways as well or better than much more expensive interventions like drugs and surgery. And all these things were thought impossible not that long ago, that it was thought impossible to reverse heart disease. It was thought impossible to reverse prostate cancer. But we now know that these simple changes in diet and lifestyle can not only help prevent, but even reverse the most common and the most expensive and the most debilitating diseases of our times. So we started with heart disease back in 1977, and we put people who had severe heart disease on a simple program that included improving what they ate, how they responded to stress, how much exercise they got, and how much love and support they had in their lives. And we used state-of-the-art measures, including what's called quantitative arteriography, which is an X-ray movie of the heart showing where the blockages are. And you can see in the upper left slide where the arrow is, there's a narrowing of one of the main arteries that feeds the heart. You know, the heart pumps blood to feed itself so that it can take care of the rest of the body. And if part of that blood supply gets disrupted, then the heart doesn't get enough blood and therefore it doesn't get enough oxygen. And that can cause chest pain or even part of the heart muscle can die. And usually those blockages get worse and worse over time, like rust building up in a pipe. But what we found is that instead of getting worse and worse, people could actually get better and better, and much more quickly than had once been thought possible. A year later in the upper right, you can see that narrowing is wider, which means the heart is getting a lot more blood. In the lower left is what's called a PET scan, which measures blood flow to the heart. And blue and black is no blood flow. So in the lower left picture, you can see there's a big part of the heart that's not getting much blood flow. In the lower right, a year later, it's orange and white, which means it's getting a normal amount of blood flow. And so it's just one of many examples of how your body can really begin to heal itself if you simply stop doing what's causing the problem. When we looked at all the arteries in all the patients, we found, compared to a randomized control group of men and women who had heart disease who weren't making these changes, that the arteries got more clogged after 1 year in the red line and even more clogged after 5 years. That's what usually happens as the heart disease gets worse and worse. But in the green line, in the people who made lifestyle changes, they got less clogged after 1 year and even more improvement after 5 years than after 1 year. Just to put a human face on this, this is a person who went through, we've been training hospitals through our nonprofit institute. We trained 10 in West Virginia, not that far from here, and a number in Pennsylvania, where we are now, of course, Nebraska, and other places. And this is, West Virginia is #1 in the country in heart disease, and one of the hospitals there had a press conference to announce the program and to talk about some of the outcomes. And this is one of the people who spoke there, just to give you a sense of how powerful these changes are. This is a little 3-minute video clip.
I began to see some real transforming physical things happening to me. First thing is I've lost 50 pounds. If anybody looking for an inexpensive wardrobe, let me know. The 7th week that I was in the program, my angina disappeared, just 7 weeks in. I thought that was a little bit too good to be true, but it was, and things like that have been happening ever since. I'll just give you my vital statistics here. My ejection fraction has increased from 45% to 61%. I lost 50 pounds. My triglycerides are down from 819 to 93. My cholesterol is down from 243 to 110. My HDL is up from 27 to 38. My PSA even went down. I'm no longer using a cane or a wheelchair. In November of 2001, I was using a cane to walk with, and I had to have the humiliating experience of riding a wheelchair around Walmart. Now, I didn't like that. I wasn't going to settle for that. I knew there must be a better way. And thank God I found a better way. I no longer have to take my diabetes medication. In fact, my total medication has been reduced by 75%. I had trouble getting to my mailbox without having chest pain. But now I'm walking at least 2 miles a day. I ride my stationary bike anywhere from 8 to 10 miles a day. At our American Heart Association Health Walk here a few months ago, I walked 2 miles in that and felt like the Energizer Bunny. I still wanted to keep going. But it has been a rewarding experience. Now, these statistics are fine, and I have certainly worked hard in trying to get them to this point, but the most wonderful part of the program is the quality of life that I'm able to enjoy now that I never thought I'd be able to again. Instead of a fear of dying, it's been replaced by a gratitude of living.
So the reason I'm so passionate about doing this work is having seen tens of thousands of people tell similar stories like this. It's something that most doctors don't get a chance to see because we're so busy just treating the symptoms without treating the cause that we don't really recognize how quickly people can get better. And one of the things that we learned that surprised me was that the more people changed their lifestyle, the more they improved in every way we could measure. The more blockage improved, the more their chest pain went away, the more their prostate cancer improved, and I'll talk more about this. So it's like so many things in life. You get out of it what you put into it. The more you change your lifestyle, the better you feel. The better you feel, the more you want to keep doing it. But also in objective measures, the more you change, the more that you improve. We found a 40% reduction in their LDL cholesterol levels. This is comparable to what you can get with statin drugs like Lipitor, but without the costs and the side effects of those drugs. We then did a study to see whether we could change the progression of prostate cancer. And as you probably know, prostate cancer is the #1 cancer in men other than skin cancer. And we did a study in collaboration with the chair of urology at UCSF and the chair of urology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And we found that comparing men who made lifestyle changes to those who didn't, their PSA level, which is a marker for prostate cancer, as most of you know, went down or got better, whereas in the control group, it got worse or went up. And here again, we found that same relationship. The more people changed their diet and lifestyle, the lower their PSA went, or in other words, the more they changed their lifestyle, the more their prostate cancer improved. When we looked at the tumor growth in vitro, we found that the group of men who made these lifestyle changes inhibited the tumor growth by 70% compared to only 9% of the control group. And here again, we found that same relationship. The more people changed their lifestyle, the more it directly inhibited the growth of their prostate cancer. And when we looked at the actual tumor activity using a new scan called MR spectroscopy as well as MRI, you can see the tumor shown in red began to shrink after a year simply by making lifestyle changes. Now, in contrast, only 1 out of 50 men who gets treated with radical prostatectomy, where they surgically remove the prostate, or chemotherapy or radiation, only 1 out of 50 men actually lives longer who gets treated for prostate cancer. The other 49 are likely to become impotent or incontinent or both. And so as we learn how powerful these simple lifestyle changes are, that they not only work as well, but in some cases even better than drugs and surgery, and the only side effects are good ones. So we wondered, how is it that people can get better so quickly? So we actually looked at their gene expression in other men with prostate cancer who went through this, and we found that after just 3 months, over 500 genes were affected. In effect, turning on the good genes that prevent prostate cancer in men, breast cancer in women, heart disease, and so on, and turning off the genes that cause those to happen in just 3 months. It's much more dynamic than people had realized were possible. And it's a very powerful message to give people, because so often people say things like, oh, I've just got bad genes, what can I do? What I call genetic nihilism. But in fact, you can do a lot. And when people realize, you mean just by changing my diet and lifestyle, in 3 months I can change hundreds of genes for the better in every case? And that when I change those genes, it actually gets passed on to my kids as well, what's called epigenetics. That's a very powerful message to give people. This is what's called a heat map showing all these genes along the right column are oncogenes that cause breast and prostate cancer. And in the beginning, it's mostly red, which means turned on. 3 months later, on the right side, it's mostly green, which is turned off, just to show you again how powerful this can be. Another study at Harvard looked at meditation alone and its effect on gene expression, and found that meditation alone caused changes in gene expression, turning on the good genes, turning off the bad genes. You can see on the upper left is the non-meditators. Then in the middle is people who were taught to meditate for 8 weeks, and on the right side are the long-term meditators. And you can see how it goes from red to green on the top and from green to red on the bottom. In other words, there's a dose-response effect of meditation as well. And people think meditation, that's kind of a wimpy thing to do. It's just sitting around, with your eyes closed and not doing much. But meditation is a very powerful thing. Meditation is the process of focusing your mind onto one thing. And it can be a sound, it could be secular, it can be religious, it can be a prayer, whatever it is that's comfortable for you. Traditionally, certain words are used in meditation, like Om in Sanskrit, or Shalom in Hebrew, or Amen, or Amin, or Salam. These are all words that start with an O or an A, they end with an M or an N. They give you that sense of focused contentment. But it also gives you more power, because anytime you can focus energy, you get power. It's like taking a magnifying glass and focusing the sun rays. You can burn through a piece of paper, or a laser is just coherent light. It's focus. You can burn through steel. Your mind is no different. And when your mind is focused, it has a more powerful effect on your body, for better and for worse. So when you're angry or upset or anxious, your mind affects your body in a negative way. But meditation can focus your mind in a positive way or in a neutral way. And whether it's in sports or in the military or in the boardroom or in the schoolroom, anytime you can focus better, you can perform better. And even just a few minutes a day can make a big difference. And also one of the side effects of meditation is that you can manage stress more effectively. And it's not that you have to hold it in or explode. It's just things don't bother you as much. So you can work at a higher level. Sometimes people say things like, I used to have a short fuse and I'd explode easily. Now my fuse is longer. Things don't bother me as much. And when you can stay in that centered place, especially when you're in a chaotic situation, everything around you is coming apart, being able to stay focused in that way has a survival advantage for you and the people that are working under you as well. This was a study that was done by Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize last year. She discovered an enzyme called telomerase, and telomerase makes your telomeres longer, and your telomeres are the ends of your chromosomes that actually control how long you live. And she did a pioneering study a few years ago where she found that women who are under chronic emotional stress, and I know many of the women here have been under chronic emotional stress as your husbands, or in the case of men, if your spouse is in the military, have been on these extended deployments and repeated deployments. And what she found is that women who are taking care of kids with autism or parents with Alzheimer's, that the more stress they reported feeling, the lower was their telomerase and the shorter their telomeres. It was the first study showing that chronic emotional stress can actually shorten your lifespan. Well, that's the bad news. The good news is that she found that it wasn't some objective measure of stress. It was the women's reaction to stress that determined how it affected their genes. In other words, you could have two women who were in comparable situations in terms of external stresses. One was coping much better than the other, and it was the women's perception of that stress that determined how it affected them. So by practicing simple stress management techniques, eating healthier, exercising, and so on, and most of all, having more love and support in your life, you can buffer that stress. You can make your fuse longer. And even when you can't change the external environment that you're in, you can change how you react to it, and that's very powerful. And it's very empowering to know that you can do that. We did a study, and we found that if chronic stress can shorten your telomeres, maybe stress management and other lifestyle changes can lengthen them. And that's what we found, that telomerase increased by almost a third in just 3 months. And even drugs haven't been shown to do this. So it just, again, illustrates how powerful these simple changes are, even on a genetic level. Controlling something as important as how long we live. So our genes are a predisposition, but our genes are not our fate. The primary determinant of in all of these studies was the degree of lifestyle change. Again, the more you change, the better you feel. The better you feel, the more you want to keep doing it. And the more you change, the more you improve in ways we can measure. And so it's not all or nothing. We've developed a concept called a spectrum because, again, the more you change, the more you improve. How much you change and how quickly is really up to you. So here's just a short video that describes this. So if you're interested in learning more about this kind of approach, talk with Dr. Williams. His Army Physical Fitness Research Institute, I think, is on the cutting edge of the best practices and the state of the art. And what you have here at the Army War College is an amazing resource. And so I would strongly urge you to work with him while you're here. I like the idea of a spectrum because it's based, part of what we learned is that even more than being healthy, people want to feel free and in control. And as soon as I tell somebody, eat this, don't eat that, do this, don't do that, they immediately want to do the opposite. It's just human nature. You know, if you go on a diet, sooner or later you're going to go off a diet because a diet's all about what you can't do and what you must do and what you have to do. And people don't like people doing that. Even the language that we use about behavioral change has this, as soon as you call foods good or bad, it's a small step to saying, I'm a bad person, I ate bad food, I cheated on my diet. All this kind of moralistic language is very counterproductive. If we talk about patient compliance, it has this manipulative quality that's really pushes people's buttons and makes them want to do the opposite. But the spectrum is all about freedom. It says there's no diet. It's just saying, look, foods aren't good or bad, but some are healthier for you than others. And to the degree that you can eat healthier foods, you're going to feel better. That's going to make you want to keep doing it. But if you indulge yourself one day, it doesn't mean you cheated or you're bad. Just eat healthier the next. If you don't have time to exercise one day, do a little more the next. And then you can't fail. And so it's a much more effective as well as a more compassionate way of doing things. Because inherent in most diets is the sense of shame and guilt and anger and humiliation. Because nobody's perfect. And that becomes counterproductive, and this avoids that completely. Because all foods are included. You can't really fail. And so we've learned over time what it is that enables people to make sustainable changes. And it's not fear, it's joy. That it's fun and freedom and pleasure and love that are sustainable. You can force yourself to do anything for some period of time, but if it's not fun, it's not sustainable. And so part of what we've learned is that because these mechanisms are so dynamic, even going to our genes, when we change our diet and lifestyle, you don't have to wait long to feel better. And when you feel better, then it makes you want to keep doing it. If we talk about risk factor reduction, it's just boring for people. They say things like, I don't care if I live longer, I want to enjoy my life, you know? Joy is so much better motivator in everything, and I'll talk about that even from the standpoint of working with people. But in terms of a lifestyle and your health, joy is much more sustainable than fear. Fear-based is risk factor reduction. Make these changes today, get your cholesterol down or your blood pressure down so something really bad like a heart attack doesn't happen to you 10 or 20 years down the road. But most people don't want to think about that. I mean, what's the mortality rate? It's still 100%. It's one per person. I don't want to be the first to break the news to you. And so I just find that efforts to try to motivate people to change that are fear of something bad happening, like dying, nobody wants to think about it. I mean, they'll do anything their doctor says for maybe a month after they've had a heart attack, and even then the denial comes back because people don't want to think that something bad will happen. And it's one of the reasons why, because fear is not a sustainable motivator, This goes all the way back to the first dietary intervention when God said, don't eat the apple, and that didn't work very well, and that was God talking, so we're not going to be better than that. And as soon as you tell like a teenager that smoking is dangerous, that just makes it cool. It's like James Dean on a Harley. And so fear-based approaches not only don't work very well, they're often counterproductive. And so what we've learned, though, is that, and I like this cartoon, the fortune teller says, I give smokers a discount because there's not as much to tell. That's the approach that doesn't work very well. But the idea that taking a pill is easy and everybody will do it, like taking your Lipitor, your statin drugs, to lower your cholesterol, but changing diet and lifestyle is difficult, if not impossible, is not what the data show. The data show that 2/3 of the people prescribed any of the statin drugs, like Lipitor, are not taking them just 3 months later. And you might say, well, why is that? Because usually someone else is paying for it and they don't have that many side effects. And the answer is because they're fear-based. Take this pill today, it prevents something really awful like a heart attack or a stroke, years down the road that you don't want to think about, so you don't, so you stop taking the pill. And so the paradox is that it's often easier to make lifestyle changes than to take a pill, even though it's harder because you feel so much better. So quickly, it reframes the reason for making these changes from fear-based approaches to joy-based approaches and love-based approaches, was really ultimately what makes it sustainable. Because there's no point in giving up something that you enjoy unless you get something back that's better and quickly. And so we're always making those kinds of trade-offs here. And because these mechanisms are so dynamic, you feel better very quickly. When you eat healthier, when you manage exercise, when you manage stress, when you exercise, when you love more, your brain gets more oxygen, more blood flow. You think more clearly, you have more energy, you focus better, you perform at a higher level. Your skin gets more blood flow. Oh, by the way, you can grow so many new brain neurons that your brain can get measurably bigger in 3 months. I mean, that was thought impossible. 10 years ago, it was thought, you're born with a certain set of brain neurons, brain cells. You go out and you drink a couple six-packs of beer, you kill off a few thousand, you never get them back. Turns out that's not the case. Your brain is so dynamic that in just a few months, you can grow so many new brain cells, your brain can get bigger. I mean, I love that. That's a very empowering thing to know. One study showed that just walking for a half hour a day, not even all that fast, for 3 months, again, caused so many brain cells to grow that people's brains got bigger. These are in 2 of the most prestigious scientific journals. And some of my favorite things actually promote neurogenesis, promote brain cell growth. Chocolate and tea and blueberries actually increase neurogenesis, whereas what's bad for your heart is bad for your brain. Saturated fat, sugar, and nicotine decrease neurogenesis. Moderate alcohol consumption actually increases your brain growth, whereas excessive does kill it off. Stress management increases it. Chronic stress decreases it. Moderate exercise increases it. And I was asked to make sure that you all hear this, that frequent sex actually increases neurogenesis. Now, you may think you're here at the Army War College just to learn how all this didactic information, but part of the reason you're here is to recover from the deployments that you've had, the long stresses that you've been under, and to really reconnect with your family. And I'm saying this in all seriousness, that having frequent sex with your spouse is a really good thing. And I want to show you that this is a study that just came out a few months ago, just actually showing the brain cells growth. This is before and a year later following having frequent sex. So frequent sex is a good thing for your brain as well as for your relationships. Your skin gets more blood when you eat and live more healthfully. This is Christy Turlington, the supermodel, and her father died of lung cancer. So she has this wonderful website called smokingisugly.com to try to de-glamorize it. If you tell kids, again, that smoking is dangerous, or you put all these gory pictures on a cigarette package, it just makes it cool because it's like it's dangerous. It's like, going into combat or something. But if you say smoking makes you ugly because nicotine causes constriction of your blood vessels. In your heart, that can cause a heart attack, and in your brain, that can cause a stroke. But in your skin, it makes you age faster. It constricts the blood vessels that feed your skin, and so you age much faster. I mean, I'm 86, and I think I look pretty good. But, but so Christy did this wonderful public service announcement. I'm just going to play it. It's just 60 seconds long.
Pictures. Yeah, you could take pictures. Dark as midnight. Dark is midnight, black is coal. It's really clingy. Oh, it's really clingy. It clings to you. Okay. It clings to you. Black is coal. Sorry. Off this way. Pictures. Yeah, you can take a picture. And if you keep using it, it'll completely change your look. Smoking is ugly.
Now, the other thing that smoking does is it constricts blood flow to your sexual organs. Half of guys who smoke have what's politely called erectile dysfunction or impotence. Half. So instead of saying smoking makes, this is one of the most effective anti-smoking ads that the Department of Health Services did. You know, it doesn't say emphysema, heart attack, lung cancer. So instead of saying smoking makes you sexy and beautiful, it makes you ugly and impotent. How fun is that? And it puts it into the here and now, not something might happen to you 10 years down the road, but what happens to you right away. That makes it effective. So what is an optimal way of eating? Because you hear so many conflicting things, and it turns out there's a real convergence of nutrition advice, that you want to consume mostly plants, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, soy products in their natural forms. Michael Pollan has some pithy sayings. He says, if it came from a plant, eat it. If it's made from a plant, avoid it. I think that's a good thing. And to use meat more as a flavoring or as in smaller amounts or for special occasions rather than something that you eat 2 or 3 times a day. You want to eat food as close as possible to its natural form, which is high in fiber and preserves all the nutrients. You want to avoid processed foods with ingredients that a third grader can't pronounce. And I like one of Michael's favorite rules is don't eat breakfast cereals that change the color of the milk. What you include in your diet is as important as what you exclude. There's literally hundreds of thousands of protective substances, phytochemicals, bioflavonoids, carotenoids, retinols, isoflavones, genistein, lycopene, on and on and on, that have anti-cancer, anti-heart disease, even anti-aging properties. You want to consume 4 grams a day of fish oil or equivalent. And the fish oil can reduce your risk of a heart attack by up to 80%, just 4 grams a day. And if you're a pregnant or a breastfeeding woman, it can raise your child's IQ by 7 to 10 points, just from that alone. So if you don't remember anything else we talk about today, take 3 or 4 grams of fish oil a day. It's a really good thing. Calories do count, of course. Organic, if you can afford it, is better in terms of both taste and health. And you want to choose quality over quantity. If you really get foods that taste good, you don't need as much of it, and you can get more pleasure with fewer calories, particularly if you pay attention to what you eat. How you eat is as important as what you eat. I mean, there have been times when I'll eat while having a bag of popcorn, watching a movie, and I'm so engrossed in the movie, I'm not even paying attention to what I'm eating or watching TV and while I'm eating, and look down, the plate's empty or the bag of popcorn's empty. It's like, who ate this? Has that ever happened to you? You get all the calories and none of the pleasure. If you really focus on something, and I like chocolate, if I just, like a fine wine, if you just savor your food or whatever it is that you really enjoy, you get more pleasure with fewer calories. And the pleasure is what makes it sustainable. The other thing is you want to reduce your intake of not only total fat, but particularly what's so-called bad fats, saturated fats, hydrogenated fats, trans fats. You want to try to eat less sodium, less salt, and also to reduce your intake of sugar and refined carbs. Refined carbs are sugar, white flour, white rice, things like that. When you go from whole wheat flour to white flour, from brown rice to white rice, you're removing the fiber. And the reason that's important is that when you eat a lot of sugar, let's say, if you have a soft drink or a lot of pasta, white rice pasta, white flour pasta, your blood sugar, your body absorbs the food very quickly because it's the fiber that slows the absorption of the food. So the sugar goes right into your blood. It makes your pancreas, makes your blood sugar spike. So then your pancreas makes insulin to bring your blood sugar back down, which is good. But over time, these chronic insulin surges can lead to diabetes. They promote inflammation, and they stimulate the growth of cancer cells. But the good carbs don't do that. Fruits and vegetables and whole grains in their natural forms are rich in fiber. The fiber slows the absorption, so rather than getting these spikes in low blood sugar, you get a nice constant source of energy that can last throughout the day. So it not only gives you a more sustained amount of energy, but it also is a lot healthier for you. The problem with too much insulin is it also accelerates the conversion of calories into fat, so it makes you gain weight. People have a hard time understanding why eating sugar should cause you to gain weight, because it not only gives you the calories, but the insulin makes you convert those calories into fat more efficiently. It also promotes heart disease and breast and prostate cancer and other conditions like that. The high-protein diets, the Atkins-type diets, also promote the blockages. On the top is, on an optimal diet like what we've been talking about, the middle is more of the typical American diet, and the bottom is on the high-protein diets that, even though they're not mediated through the traditional risk factors, if you actually look at the arteries, their arteries are more clogged when you eat that way. Lifestyle changes can be not only as good as drugs, but in some cases even better. They found that in preventing type 2 diabetes, which is now epidemic, half of Americans, will have diabetes or prediabetes in the next 8 years. And the consequences of diabetes are that you go blind, you're impotent, you get gangrene, you have parts of your body removed, heart attacks, eye damage, nerve damage, kidney damage are completely preventable simply by changing diet and lifestyle. It worked better than drugs at preventing diabetes. And more recently, they found that in terms of treating diabetes, the lifestyle changes worked even better than drugs at preventing the complications of diabetes. We can take people who have elevated blood sugars, put them through our program, like the guy in the video, and normalize their blood sugars within 3 months. So can Dr. Williams in the Army program here, so you should check it out. Lifestyle changes can be synergistic with drugs. Sometimes drugs are needed. This was a study that looked at a drug to treat psoriasis, a skin condition, and found that the drug plus meditation cleared the psoriasis faster than the drug alone. And even when people have flu shots, they found that their immune response is enhanced when they're doing meditation plus the flu shot than the flu shot alone. So there's synergy there. And there are health policy implications. You're all aware of what's been going on this past week this week in Washington with all the debates over health policy and cutting costs and the deficit and so on. And we have, on one end, the people who say, let's cut out Medicare, let's cut out Social Security, let's reduce the deficit that way. You have other people who say, let's raise taxes, let's let the deficit go up. Neither one are really very good, and so there's just been all this battling going on, and nobody seems to be winning. But there's a third alternative, which goes back to our prime directive. If we can treat the underlying cause, then we have new approaches. For example, 3/4 of the $2.5 trillion in healthcare costs, which are really sick care costs, are due to chronic diseases like heart disease, most of which can be not only avoided, but even reversed simply by changing lifestyle. So that's a huge cost savings. If we, and it gives us a third alternative from the painful choices that we've been talking about. Now, what's the evidence that this can really make a difference? There was a major study that came out a couple of years ago in one of the major journals. They found that just walking a half hour a day, not smoking, eating a reasonably healthy diet, and keeping a healthy weight prevented 93% of diabetes. Think about that. Diabetes is going to affect half of Americans in the next 8 years, and it's almost completely preventable in 93% of people or more. Okay? It prevented 81% of heart attacks. Heart disease kills more Americans, and not only Americans, but in most parts of the world now, than virtually all other conditions combined. And it's completely preventable for, in this study, 81%, in another study I'll show you, in 95% of people today. It's not like we need a new breakthrough, we just need to put into practice what we already know, as well as half of strokes and a third of cancers. This is the Inner Heart study that, in looking at 30,000 patients in in every continent, that 95% of heart disease was preventable today just by changing lifestyle. It's mind-boggling. You think that it kills more people than everything else combined. We spend trillions of dollars on it, and it's completely preventable today for almost everybody, if we just put into practice what Dr. Williams and others are doing. Now, how do we treat heart disease? We treat it with drugs and surgery. Angioplasties and stents, $60 billion were spent last year just in the US. We'd say, well, it's a lot of money, but maybe it's worth it if it saves lives, but it doesn't. The major studies in the New England Journal of Medicine and elsewhere have shown that angioplasties and stents do not prevent heart attacks, do not even prolong life, and yet we still do them because they're reimbursed. Likewise, bypass surgery and bypass surgery doesn't prolong life, except in the 1 or 2% of people who have the most severe heart disease. The other 98% of people, they're getting their chest cut open for nothing. You could simply change your lifestyle and accomplish more at a fraction of the cost. The problem is reimbursement. The doctor says, I can operate, or you can go on a strict diet, and the patient says, well, you better operate because my insurance doesn't cover a strict diet, and that's been the problem. So what I call reimbursement-based medicine, that's changing because Medicare is now covering our program, and hopefully ones like it in the near future. And if we change reimbursement, we change medical practice and even medical education. Childhood obesity is a major issue that I'm sure you already know about. That people, it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative, when you hear that something's threatening your kids, it really brings out a primal response in everybody. And when people hear that this may be the first generation which our kids live a shorter lifespan than their parents, that's something that we can all rally behind. And especially when we know that 15% of kids are overweight or obese, as well as 2/3 of their parents. The former Surgeon General referred to this as the terrorist threat from within, which I think it is. And we can do something about that. Diabetes in 30-year-olds has risen 70% in the last decade. And again, it's not because our genes have changed, it's because our lifestyles have changed. And overweight teens have the arteries of someone who's 35 years older than that. It also has a lot of implications for the corporate world. Healthcare costs are really reaching a tipping point. Starbucks spends more money for healthcare for their employees than they do for coffee beans. Mars spends more for healthcare than they do for sugar. General Motors more for healthcare than for steel. Now, I worked with Steve Bird, the CEO of Safeway. In 2005, he approached me and said that we're spending 120% of our net revenues on healthcare for our employees. That's clearly not sustainable. And so we put into practice at the workplace, and we found that the cost went down 11% in the first year, and they've remained essentially flat since then. Again, these mechanisms are so dynamic biologically, you can see economic returns in the first year when you begin making these changes. And what's good for you is good for the planet. What's personally sustainable is globally sustainable. It turns out that eating meat and livestock consumption causes more global warming than all forms of transportation combined. And so if you simply eat lower on the food chain and make meat more of a treat than something that you eat 2 or 3 times a day, it not only helps you, it helps the planet. It also takes a lot more energy and a lot more resources to eat higher on the food chain. And it's also a major cause of rainforest deforestation. There's this globalization of chronic disease that's going on as other countries are starting to eat like us and live like us and die like us. And again, this has all happened in the last 20 years. Used to be you went to Asia, it was very rare to see heart disease or obesity or diabetes. Now it's epidemic there just the same way as it is in this country. More people are dying today in Asia of heart disease and diabetes than AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. And it's diverting a lot of precious resources away from things that do require drugs, like AIDS, TB, and malaria, to things that can be prevented just by lifestyle changes. I just want to briefly go through. We did a few demonstration projects showing how this can save money very quickly. We did one with Mutual of Omaha, where they found that almost 80% of patients who were told they needed a bypass or angioplasty could avoid it by going through our program, and they saved almost $30,000 per year in the first year. Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield, not far from here in Pittsburgh, found that they cut their costs in half in the first year and by an additional 20 to 30% when compared to a matched control group of people with similar conditions. So you don't have to wait long to see that these are both medically effective as well as cost effective. And as I mentioned, Medicare is now covering our program, which is really great. If you're interested in this, you go to our website. There's a lot more information, pmri.org. It's all free. We found, just to show you some of in the first couple thousand patients, we found almost a 20-pound weight loss beginning 12 weeks, 1 year. We found their chest pain fell dramatically and continued to decrease. Their ability to exercise rose quickly and stayed up. Their quality of life, you know the old joke, am I going to live longer? Is it just going to seem longer if I change my lifestyle? Isn't the change. You can actually enjoy life more when you make these changes. Systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure came down to the point that most people could get off their medications. And diabetes, we're able to normalize their blood sugars and remove and prevent the complications of diabetes that we've been talking about. The last thing I want to talk about is really, I think, in many ways the most important, that the real epidemic in our culture isn't just heart disease or diabetes or breast cancer or prostate cancer. It's loneliness and depression and isolation, in part because of the breakdown of the social networks that used to give us a sense of connection and community. And this is true of our culture in general, but it's particularly true in the military because you get moved around so much and you're away for extended periods of time. And we all know that these things affect the quality of our lives, but they actually affect our survival in many ways, in a direct way. Study after study have shown that people who are lonely and depressed are 3 to 8, in some cases 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely than those who have a sense of love and connection and community in their lives, independent of their blood pressure, their cholesterol, their weight, and the usual kinds of things that we measure. And it's also true that people are more likely to abuse themselves when they're lonely and depressed. In our studies, I asked people, I said, why do you smoke, and why do you overeat and drink too much and work too hard and abuse substances? These behaviors seem so maladaptive to me. And they'd say, Dean, you don't get it. You don't have a clue. These behaviors are not maladaptive. They're very adaptive because they help us get through the day. They say things like, I've got 20 friends in this package of cigarettes, and they're always there for me, and nobody else is. You're going to take away my 20 friends? What are you going to give me? Or they say, food fills the void, or fat coats my nerves and numbs the pain, or alcohol numbs the pain, or other drugs numb the pain, or working all the time numbs the pain, or video games numb the pain. We have lots of ways of numbing and killing and literally or figuratively bypassing the pain. But to me, pain is not the problem. Pain is not the enemy. Pain is your friend. Pain is information. It's your body's way of saying, hey, listen up, pay attention. You're not doing something that's in your best interest. If we didn't have pain, you hold yourself on a hot stove, you would never know until you smell your flesh burning. And so pain is information. And so it's not enough to focus on behaviors or give people information and say, don't do this, it's bad for you. We have to say, why are people doing things that are bad for them? And say, okay, if it's the loneliness and depression and isolation that are causing us to have these unhealthy behaviors, What can we do to make people feel less lonely and more regarded and more of a sense of connection and community, which is not only going to improve the quality of our lives, it's going to affect our survival. Now, that's particularly true in the military because it can affect your survival in ways I'll talk about in a moment beyond just your health. Information alone is not sufficient. If it were, nobody would smoke. Everybody knows cigarettes are bad for you. We have to work at a deeper level. Now, there's some really interesting studies that show how powerful these issues are. That, we tend to think of love as, well, how that's kind of touchy-feely and all that. You say, yeah, it is, but look at the data. This is a study that's in the Journal of the American Medical Association. They looked at people 6 months after a heart attack, and they found that those who were depressed, 18% were dead. Those that weren't depressed, 3% were dead, independent of their diet, their cholesterol, or other factors. That's a 6-fold difference in mortality 6 months after a heart attack from that one factor alone, being lonely and depressed and isolated. That's how powerful it is. At Yale, they did a study, and they found that they gave people a questionnaire before they did an angiogram to look at their heart disease, and they found that the more, they said, do you feel love and support by your primary partner, by your wife, your husband, your significant other? And those that said yes had significantly less blockages in their arteries than those who didn't feel supported by their spouse, independent of their diet and lifestyle and genes and other factors like that. When you're depressed, your immune system is depressed. Study after study have shown that your T lymphocyte and B lymphocyte and natural killer cell activity and so on are depressed when you're depressed. So it affects your ability to ward off infection. And it's a microcosm as well. If the men that you're working with are depressed, they're going to be less effective in combat than those who aren't. There's a study that was done of men and women who are HIV positive, and they found that those who were depressed had more than double the likelihood of developing AIDS and dying from it than those who weren't, because again, their immune systems are depressed when they're depressed. Now, what can we do about it? This was a pioneering study that was done at Stanford where they took women who had metastatic breast cancer and they randomly divided them into 2 groups. Both groups got the same conventional chemo and radiation and surgery. But in addition, one group met together in a supportive environment where they were encouraged to just be authentic with each other, to talk about what was really going on in their lives, and to not have to worry about what people would think about that. And they just did that for a year. 5 years later, those women lived twice as long as those who didn't have the support group. Now, a skeptic or a cynic might say, oh, give me a break. You mean sitting around with a bunch of people talking about my feelings in a group is going to help me live longer if I've got cancer? Please, but that's what the data show. Because we are touchy-feely creatures. We are creatures of community. That's how we've survived as a species, is by helping each other. And we ignore these at our own peril. And if we understand, to me, part of the value of science is it can raise awareness. And awareness is always the first step in anything, and particularly in healing. And if we understand how important these issues are, not just to the quality of our lives, but to our survival, then we can pay more attention to them in our own personal lives as well in the lives of people who are our subordinates. Intimacy, in a sense, is healing. Even the word healing comes from the root to make whole. Yoga comes from the Sanskrit, meaning to unite, to yoke, to bring together. These are very old ideas that we're rediscovering. And so it's not just about living longer, it's about how we can transform our lives for the better, how we can use the experience of pain or suffering as a catalyst or as a doorway for transforming our lives for the better. I can't tell you how many patients have said things to me like, having a heart attack was the best thing that ever happened to me, or having the diagnosis of prostate cancer or breast cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me. You go, what are you, crazy? And they say, no, that's what it took to get my attention, to begin making my life so much more joyful and meaningful that I might not have ever done that otherwise. But why wait for a heart attack or something to get your attention? I'm hoping that today's lecture and the kinds of things that Dr. Williams and others are doing here can help you guide that and to understand we don't have, just like a ship that goes off course, if you can correct it easier, it's a lot easier than waiting for something catastrophic to happen. And even the spiritual truths that you find in all religions, altruism, forgiveness, compassion, and love, are really about things that can free us from our suffering and help heal us and help us live longer. I remember the very first day of the first study that I did back in 35 years ago. I was a medical student. And I had 10 men and women who had heart disease, and I put them in a hotel for a month. And one was a 75-year-old dentist who hated gay people, and one of the other patients, of course, was gay. And they went at it the first day, and they started calling each other's names and yelling at each other, and they both got chest pain. I thought they were both going to have a heart attack and die, and this was going to be the end of my very short research career. And I talked to them separately. I said, you're giving power to give you chest pain and maybe a heart attack and die to the guy you hate the most, that you're most angry with. That's not really smart. To get away from this idea, is it selfish or is it unselfish? Well, it's both. And so I said, when you empower the person you hate the most to give you a heart attack, that's not really smart. And so from that perspective, when we forgive somebody or when we're compassionate about them, it doesn't excuse or condone what they've done, but what it does is it frees us from that suffering and enables us to be more empowered because we're not being buffeted around by all those different things. And so I asked, well, actually, one last thing before I talk about this. So that anything that promotes a sense of connection and community, that goes from the separate I of lonely, depressed, isolated, to the sense of we, the sense of connection and community, goes from illness to wellness. And that's really important because when you're, first of all, I meant to say when I first started how honored I am to be here, that you are the best of the best here, and you're going to be influencing the lives of millions of people directly and indirectly that are going to be under your command. And that's why I'm here, because I respect so much what you're doing, and I appreciate so much what you're doing for our country. And if you can understand that the time that you spend with your family and your friends is not selfish, that's what's essential to your own growth and development and your own health and your own well-being, that when you can foster a loving environment in the people that you're commanding, that's not a touchy-feely weak thing. That's what gives you the most strength and the most power. I asked former General Stan McChrystal if he would make a short little video to talk about these things, because I figured if I'm talking about them, I'm a California doctor, I've never been in combat, you can dismiss that, but he's not. And I asked him to comment on these things, so this is just a little short video that he made for this talk today.
Dean, this is Stan McChrystal. Thanks for letting me be a part of your presentation today on the power of love. It's not something you'd normally hear in a military gathering, but I don't think it's inappropriate. I go back to my early days in my career, and I think all of us experience this. There were leaders who would use negative or coercive leadership, sometimes through fear or intimidation, to try to get us to do whatever it is they wanted us to do. What I found through experience, and it was first taught to me by Major General Bill Garrison, was that no matter how much fear we create in subordinates, that's just not strong enough to force them into actions when they're more scared of something else, particularly a situation like combat. When the chance of being injured or killed by the enemy is great, any fear they have of their chain of command is likely to be very insignificant. What we find, of course, is that in the end, soldiers react to what they feel strongly about. They react to positive leadership, they react to positive values, they react to a positive environment created around them, and they react to a positive example from leaders that they respect and leaders they care deeply about. In a sense, soldiers do what they feel strongly about, and it really gives to the idea it's the power of the positive aspect. It's they do what they want to do, not what they're scared to do. So I think the power of love is appropriate. Thanks, Dean. All the best.
So I want to just end by saying that the soft things, the time that you spend with the people that you're commanding, the men and women that are under your command, just take a few minutes and say, what's this like for you? How are you feeling about this? And just listen. And even if you can't fix the problem, just the problem that you're really trying to fix is not what they're talking about. It's the sense of feeling isolated and having these feelings and not knowing what to do with them. And if you can create a loving, supportive environment in your work area, in the people that you command, they will become your most loyal supporters. And as General McChrystal said, you can't scare people into doing those kinds of things because the fear of getting killed in battle is a lot worse than anything that you could do to them. But you can motivate. People will die for their fellow soldiers. They'll die for their commanding officers if they love you and if they care for you. And that time that you spend with them is an investment in not only their health, but in yours as well. And so I would encourage you again, during this time that you're here at the Army War College, is to spend time with the people that matter to you. Make sure you spend time with your spouse and your loved ones and your family, of course, but pick up the phone and call people you haven't had a chance to connect with in a long time. It doesn't take that long. Just say, hey, I've been thinking about you. I've been worried about you. I've been concerned about you. Here's what's happening in my life. Tell me what's been happening in yours. Not just the stuff you're doing, but more importantly, the feelings that are behind that. Because it's really our feelings that connect us, and that connection is really healing.